More women may be psychopaths than previously thought, says expert. Dr. Clive Body says assessment skews towards obvious male traits, but female psychopathy is more subtle. I could see that. I could see that. Same thing with autism as well. Probably with ADHD too, you know.
Probably.
Maybe
a lot of that stuff is misunderstood because the way it presents in women, it's the same disorder, but it presents differently in different sexes.
Yes. When it comes to a typical psychopath, the suited and booted Patrick Bateman from the novel American Psycho might spring to mind, says The Guardian. But according to one expert, the number of women with the neuropsychiatric disorder could be far greater than previously thought. Psychopaths are generally considered to lack empathy and guilt, exhibit antisocial behavior, lie frequently and be ruthless, narcissistic, manipulative, and don't shower. So I added that last bit in, but that's a suspicion I have. Psychopaths are after money, power, and control, said Dr. Clive Body from Anglia Ruskin University, who is an expert on psychopaths in the corporate world. Psychopaths are after money, power, and control, said Dr. Clive Body from Anglia Ruskin University, who is an expert on psychopaths in the corporate world. While the idea of psychopaths as violent, antisocial criminals has given way to a more nuanced view, with Body among those to argue that they are often found in big business, the idea that they are mostly male has remained. Yeah, I think your violent psychopath is but one class of psychopath, perhaps even a much rarer class than the non-violent. Skewing. Although even the non-violent skewing ones, I'm sure, are perfectly capable of violence. It might be purely a factor of IQ, that if they have a higher IQ, then they can do more without violence. If they have a lower IQ, they can do less without violence, so they just end up doing violence. But then there's some very intelligent serial killers, so there's a great deal of variation there as well.
Yes. The term psychopath, by the way, has been largely dropped by the psychological community because it's so broad. I mean, we talk about the dark triad, but psychopath is a very that is a term that can apply to a whole a number of different psychological disorders. It's a colloquialism, I would say.
Fair enough, but like nested hierarchies of traits in biology, taxonomically speaking, it's still useful to have a term for that group thing. If psychopath refers to people who lack empathy broadly, and who pursue power and a few other basic things, then I think it's still a useful term.
Yeah, from that standard, of course. But pursuing power, however, that falls into Machiavellianism a little bit more than psychopathy inherent.
It may be that Machiavellianism and the other dark triads are more like common collections of traits rather than their own conditions. Although I suppose there isn't much distinction in practice.
They have a lot of crossover, yes, that's true.
So your psychopath might just be someone who has a decent portion of each of the three triadic, trait clusters. So, a small but mounting body of evidence describes female psychopaths as prone to expressing violence verbally rather than physically, with the violence being of a relational and emotional nature, more subtle and less obvious than that expressed by male psychopaths, he noted, adding that that may include spreading rumors and lies for personal advantage. This is the stereotype of women that's held in niche internet circles, is the female psychopath.
It's not a stereotype, it's a reality.
It's a reality, but it's not all of them, obviously. But yes, it is a lot.
No, but it's look, part of the thing that happens with science, is social science in particular, and particularly psychological, psychiatric work, is that they define the terms via like the DSM, and then it excludes a whole bunch of people who probably fall under one of these sort of conditions, but it's not the typical one that's defined under the DSM-5. So they have to then realize maybe we've missed something. We've missed out on something here because we've defined our terms so specifically. And the DSM-5 is fairly open, but normally, like with psychopathy, as with almost all things, it's usually like here's like 7 criteria, and you have to reach like 5 out of 7 of them to be diagnosed with it.
Yeah,
I believe that's actually the case with psychopathy. Yes,
I would. So I understand it as that there's a list of maybe a couple hundred readily identifiable traits that people can have, and that some of them are traits of some named cluster: psychopathy, autism, ADHD. And I view these.
Let's bring it up.
I view these not necessarily as disabilities, though they certainly can be, but I just view them as like classes or silos or groups of personality traits, really. And it's not just personality, but it definitely affects that. So I can notice traits of autism and ADHD and psychopathy just as many people can, and narcissism and all kinds of other things. And you can notice a single trait of it in someone, but that doesn't mean that they are clinical, but it still means they have that trait of narcissism or of something else. So I think it is possibly worth using these terms more broadly than just in the medical context, or at least
Yeah, I'm trying to
having an
pull up the
idea of them.
DSM beyond. I think that have they linked? Have they just totally truncated psychopathy with antisocial personality? I don't think. I'm trying to look for the DSM V criteria.
Mm.
Criteria. So I would like to see the exact things that are included.
Okay. While you continue finding that, I'll continue
Yes.
reading.
Sure.
Body said one problem was that part of an assessment used to help identify psychopathic traits, known as the Levinson Self-Report Psychopathy Scale, was skewed towards men. And funnily enough, like asking a psychopath to self-report is not likely to be particularly effective, especially if they have some idea. Well, I'm different from everyone else.
No,
I don't care.
Exactly.
So a lot of them will probably lie on it. But you can't really do a lot better than that. Unless you very, very much abstract it, then you might trick some of the less intelligent ones. That, he said, was because while the first part of the assessment looked at how emotionally detached, selfish, uncaring, and manipulative a person was, the second part, which covered the psychopathic lifestyle, focused on violent and antisocial behavior. Yeah, so I could definitely see that being a problem, because it probably is mostly men that do that, although not exclusively. The whole thing about some of the easiest ways to find a psychopath is, or to detect one, is did they play with fire as a child? Did they torture animals as a child? I think there's one more that I've forgotten, but some really clear ones from childhood, and both of those are physically violent. So it's quite possible that women are just less likely to do that. Bryce says, can't we tell psychopaths based on brain scans? I don't know, actually. Maybe Aiden would.
Yeah, there's some information on that. I guess how did I know this? They have reclassified psychopathy as just here's what it is. Psychopathy is used as a term not within the DSM-5, but more in a non-clinical dark triad kind of traits where we're looking for. So that's why I'm more familiar with psychopathy as a term because we use that in like calm. But the DSM-5 dropped psychopathy and replaced it with antisocial personality disorder. So let's look at antisocial. Let me find that area. That's what it's the same thing though. If they've truncated them.
I mean, the way that that's worded sounds like it could be applied to like an autist who's not interested in socializing. I guess anti is not quite the same as non-social, but it's still it's not the term I would choose to use, I don't think. Hurt self, timeline says. Hurting self, that's, especially in women, that's more of a borderline thing. But then I wonder if borderline is just the name that we have given to female psychopathy, or female psychopathy with perhaps a few other traits. Because so borderline's all about a lack of personal identity and the manipulation of a group and that kind of thing. That's not necessarily part of female psychopathy, but it could be. It certainly correlates with it. So like in a lot of things, it's factor analysis. You make a group of something, you categorize something together, but then you later find a better way, a better regime of categorizing everything. So terms get lost, terms change their basis. This does make sense. But I do wonder if borderline is mostly just female psychopathy with perhaps one or two other traits in there as well.
Probably it presents but differently. So here's the symptoms and criteria via the DSM-5 for antisocial personality, which is what psychopathy has been lumped into. Now psychopathy is only used as a subclinical term. Bizarre to me, but it is. These are the criteria on A. Now you must have, there are 7 subfeatures, and you must meet 4 of these 7. 1, failure to obey laws and norms by engaging in behavior which results in criminal arrest or would warrant a criminal arrest. 2, lying, deception, or manipulation for profit or self-amusement. 3, so that one, that's borderline, by the way. 3, impulsive behavior, that's borderline. 4, but irritability and aggression. Yeah, potentially. That's why there's a lot of overlap between all of these things.
Yeah.
4, irritability and aggression manifested by as frequent assaults on others or engaging in fighting. So that I think the difference probably between antisocial personality disorder and borderline is that antisocial or psychopathy is very it's more based on fighting. It's more based on aggressive acts. 5, bluntly disregards safety of self and others. That's also part of BPD, and many other psychological dysfunction. 6, a pattern of irresponsibility. You also find that in borderline, to be fair. And 7, a lack of remorse for action. The other criteria are that the person must be over the age of 18 and that the disorder was present by history before the age of. So Is antisocial personality disorder, aka psychopathy, just the male version of borderline? I actually don't. It's similar, but they are different. The way that women enact this stuff is way more manipulative. It's way
Mm.
more focused on social manipulation, on doing things like harming themselves, and claiming to be suicidal. That's the kind of stuff you get in BPD cases, right?
Yeah, but I just wonder if, as this article is saying, that you could just word that as female psychopathy, that that's just the form it takes.
But yeah, no, it might just be that it manifests differently. So maybe it is the same fundamental psychiatric underlying issue and just manifests differently in men and women. That would make sense to me, actually. That would perfectly make sense.
As I
Because
said,
the male one is very
yeah,
externally aggressive. The female one is very socially aggressive.
yeah. But I do wonder if, because one of the, as I said, one of the main traits of borderline is the lack of personal identity. And I do wonder if that is an assessment of something which is just the result of not having empathy. I don't know about that.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah. The secondary element and the measures for it were largely based on study of criminals who were in jail at the time and psychopathic. So the feeling is among researchers these days that those measures are just not suited to identifying female psychopathy, he says. There'd also been fewer studies looking at psychopathy in women than in men, he said, and assessors may be reluctant to label women as psychopaths. So that's certainly going to be true. Men are sort of a lot easier to treat as I guess, anthropological studies, whereas women are valued as people more often, I get the feeling these days.
Some men are treated as just objects, essentially, disposable things, whereas women are, and that's been the case for hundreds.
I mean, chat, just look at the way they dress in formal settings. Women dress in all kinds of varied ways, or in a way that shows their personality. Men, the same suit, maybe different tie color. That men are viewed as expendable, self-similar units of an economy. Women are viewed as expressive, special, and unique units of a society. Now, I'm not necessarily saying this is wrong, but it would be wrong to pretend that men have all the advantages.
Yes, obviously.
It is interesting. I do suspect that some of the categories we use for mental illnesses may be slightly wrong and slightly misnamed. And I also suspect that treating these things as always clinical isn't helpful because they can be very useful for assessing people's personality.
That's what it is, though. Is that, okay, so like antisocial personality disorder is a personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is a personality disorder.
Yeah, but I don't just mean disorder. I mean, people that are not clinically at fault due to their combination of traits, but you can identify psychopath or borderline or narcissistic traits or autistic traits in them. These clusters of traits, I view them as more useful to describe not disorder conditions, but as clusters of normal traits, which if you have too many of them can become a disorder, but that's very much a gradated line. That's subjective. But
I think that's exactly what autism is, by the way. I think autism is exactly like an just something that things that humans develop to try and develop advanced intelligence. Something went a little scurry and it ended up a little bit too high on the calculation side and too low on the social comprehension side. That's what I think a large part of autism is.
Autism is an exaggerated form of what separates what separates the human mind from the animal mind. It's an exaggerated form of that because the human mind can do simulation, whereas very few other animals can do that. That's how I'd word it, but you'd often hear it called like conscious thought.
Sure.
But autism is just specialized more towards that, very narrow abilities or interests, very narrow passions, but despecialize towards the general stuff. And so they need a more stable environment to thrive in. And so autists don't do well when a society is unhealthy.
No.
Same with...
we really do not do well when society is unhealthy.
Yeah.
Because we need stability in which to be autistic.
Autists are the long reach out into the abyss of the unknown, whereas normies are just the platform from which they reach. And in a sense, ADHD is the same. It's just less into the platform of the unknown and more into the platform of the unspeakable, I suppose. The disallowed, the forbidden. Because ADHD people live more in the moment, rely less on adhering to a collective to know what to do. And I personally, I find the caring about principles is something much more common to ADHD, because principles don't require you to remember anything beyond the principle itself, but they do allow you to react to every situation pretty quickly. As long as the principle is good, you can react to any situation in a way that's consistent and solid. And so ADHD, I think, tend to dissent.
Yeah, I'd never thought of it that way. But that does follow. Yeah.
I think most of Cabal is, I think even more than the autistic traits, we probably have those important ADHD traits, but certainly a mix of the two. And I think the addiction to truth is also something in autism. And so I think pretty much everyone in Cabal has that ability to dissent against the collective from ADHD and the addiction to the truth from autism. This is what I mean. These are traits of a cluster. I don't view them as clinical. I view them as ways to describe a person, regardless whether they're debilitating in their totality. And maybe using the medical terms in that way is not helpful, is misleading, but then giving better terms. Maybe
at least for me. I mean, I was diagnosed with autism as a full-on adult, not as a child. And I got very angry when I was diagnosed with it, because I was like 21 and I was well aware of who Christian was. And I felt like I was being personally attacked. But it is, I think, what you said, dedication to the truth. That's kind of a very key running through thing of a lot of autists.
And the literal truth as well, not necessarily the one that's most beneficial. That may just be a normie trait, actually. Seeing what is beneficial regardless what is true. That may be a normie trait, or it may be a psychopathy trait. I'm not sure, but
it's probably a normie trait, because that's trying to get along. It's trying to get the tribe to. We can just all agree. Let's not fight over semantics. Let's not fight over minutia. We'll just all agree that this is what we decided that the truth is, regardless of data or science or anything else. And that makes sense from a normie perspective. If you're trying to not rock the boat, that's what you would do, right? We'll just agree that this is the way things are.
Well, I think normies, while psychopaths pursue power, autists pursue truth, and normies pursue what's normal. And I think that's generally good. The majority of the population pursues what's normal, because that means that any changes are stable and have to prove themselves over time. Things move a bit slower. So don't be too upset with the normies chat. If the normies cannot comprehend that what you're saying is true because it's not what is normal, don't be too upset with them, because on a collective level, it's important that we have most people like that. They keep society stable.
Yep.
But your job at that point is to find other people who are not normies and who will join with you in recognizing that it's true. And eventually, you will change how society functions, and the normies will attach to that when it changes. Which is what we're doing now.
True. Because again, a whole society of autists can't function, I don't think. Autists, I think, I do believe that it's part of the human evolutionary process that have developed autism. Like I don't think it is an aberration, but I think it's there on purpose. Like every once in a while, you got to have these people that are weird, but are able to think outside of the box in order to be able to provide some other ideas to the normies or something like that, or to think about things to help the normie society. But normies ultimately are trying to do what they think is best for them. Do they often make horrible decisions? Yes, that's why I'm not in favor of democracy. But regardless, the normies usually aren't they aren't doing things bad on purpose. But I also don't think you could have a society of all autists that would also fall apart.
Unfortunately, the issue with our day is that a propaganda method was discovered, or perhaps just enhanced, in the 20th century, which specifically targets normies in a way that they cannot deflect. And if you can control a large portion of the institutions in a society, perhaps just the intellectuals, and you can start spreading normalization propaganda, you can persuade the normies that this is what was always normal. Or you can just, they don't think, was this always normal? But you word it like it was, and they'll accept it.
Yes.
That's what's happened. They bypassed
it's cognitive.
The autists, and by the way, the transgender thing is a similar attack on the autists.
Yes.
But the intellectuals of our society, those established who were perhaps autistic but were not as willing to change, they betrayed the rest of society, or were themselves part of the plan. The rest of us now, the autists who were not part of the establishment, it's our job now to replace the thinking meat of our society with ourselves, or with our own influence, with better thinking meat. With,
Yes.
again, the hero classes, those who have the narcissism for charisma, the ADHD for dissent, and the autism for truth. People like Trump, people like Carrie Lake, people like maybe Farage and some others. Millet.
Sure.
That's how the process works.
How it hopefully should work, and hopefully I think it does appear to be moving in that direction. And let's hope that it does.
Indeed.